Good evening. Welcome to APTN National News Weekend. I'm Melissa Ridgen. The National Inquiry into Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women and Girls wrapped up hearings in Winnipeg this week. On the last day, they heard from 6 experts and knowledge keepers who spoke of direct links between the child welfare system and missing and murdered women. Brittany Hobson explains.
After more than a year of hearings across Canada and 5 days of testimony on the child welfare system in Winnipeg, the National Inquiry is leaving with a grim reality.
What we'll find is that there is an overrepresentation of women who were in care or children who were in care at the time of their deaths being amongst murdered and missing Indigenous women.
Cindy Blackstock told commissioners this on Wednesday, but it's something they've already heard coast to coast.
None of these statistics are new per se.
Experts spoke about the overrepresentation of Indigenous kids in care and the overwhelming number of girls who are victims of sexualized violence. The inquiry says this indicates a direct link between the child welfare system and the missing and murdered.
Well, of course they're not safe. Of course they're more vulnerable to violence and exploitation. It's a straight line.
Part of this is because children lack the proper cultural supports while in the system.
You know, they're taken at young ages, and the moment they're apprehended, they lose everything they know, and they're catapulted into grief and loss, and there's no one there to support them or help them recover.
Cora Morgan is Manitoba's First Nations family advocate. She argued Indigenous communities need to be the ones leading the child welfare system.
We also need our elders and grandmothers to be defining what culturally appropriate is.
One of the other major issues brought up this week was lack of supports for kids aging out of care and how this puts them at risk.
Violence against Indigenous girls in particular in care, that leaves them vulnerable. When they age out of the system, there are no supports for them, and they're left basically on the street with their belongings in a green garbage bag.
Commissioners will be in Newfoundland beginning October 15th for the last hearings before submitting their final report next year. Brittany Hobson, APTN National News, Winnipeg.
Winnipeg police are investigating the death of a 33-year-old woman whose body was found at a recycling facility last week. While homicide investigators work to piece together what happened and who's responsible, her parents spoke about the shock of their daughter being the latest statistic.
Mary Madeline Yellowback's lifeless body was found Friday night at a recycling depot in Winnipeg. She is from the God's Lake First Nation in northern Manitoba, a remote flying community over 500 kilometers north of Winnipeg. She was in Winnipeg for medical appointments. Police say she was last seen downtown.
The investigation is continuing by members of our homicide unit.
Indigenous leaders and family members held a press conference to show support for her family. MKO Missing and Murdered Women and Girls Liaison Hilda Anderson-Pierce says,
I just want the community to know how loved and valued our Indigenous sisters are in our community and how we deserve, to live a life where we feel safe and where we're honored. And as a community, we mourn the loss of one of our sisters, Mary Yellowback.
Michelle Audette is a commissioner with the National Inquiry for Murdered and Missing Women and Girls.
Why it's still happening every week. Every 2 weeks we meet across Canada to receive the truth of the families, to receive the truth of people that has that passion, knowledge, or frustration.
Yellowback's parents, Rex and Hagar Ross, are pleading for answers.
We need closure to this tragedy that we encountered through my daughter. I never realized that it will be me. It will be me that would lose a daughter through this tragic event of being destroyed, her life being cut short.
Winnipeg police are asking anyone with information to come forward. Ashley Branson, APTN National News, Winnipeg.
As people across the country gathered to remember missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls, a mother in southern Alberta completed a 40-hour healing journey to honor her 2 daughters. And as Tamara Pimentel tells us, she met some new friends and had some help along the way.
It's a walk she planned to do with her daughters. Although they couldn't be by her side, they were with her in spirit.
as Stephanie English arrived in Calgary.
I never thought I'd be on this end having to walk this walk. But I did it. I did it for us. I did it for all of us.
APTN first met English when she started in Picani. She was alone, with her mother driving beside her, and despite a heavy snowfall, began to travel 200 kilometers by foot. But on her journey, people heard about her story and began to help, and some even joined her for the walk. Wearing a ribbon skirt with two hearts representing her daughters, Joey and Allison, English made it to Calgary and united with hundreds in the downtown core for the Sisters in Spirit Vigil. English lost Allison to suicide in 2015, and a year later, Joey's body was found dismembered in various locations across Calgary. It was their dream to walk from their home reserve to the annual vigil with their mother, and fulfilling that dream became a healing journey for English, a chance to pray and honor the one she lost.
Leaving the negative behind, especially through the storm that I walked through. And what I'm going through right now is I feel so light. Now it's just focusing on the next step of the justice part. I've sat too long for 2 years, and this is enough. I take my stand from here for myself, for my children, and for all us First Nations Nitsitibis, to bring the awareness out there. This is something that can't be forgotten.
Tamara Pimentel, APTN National News, Calgary.
Indigenous healing lodges came under scrutiny this past week. Many Canadians were outraged by the news that a woman who murdered a young girl in Ontario had been transferred to one months ago. It has been described as everything from a health spa to a vacation resort, but as Todd Lamrand reports, the Elizabeth Fry Society says that's not so.
Cassandra Churcher feels the need to set straight a lot of misconceptions about the Okimau-Ochi Healing Lodge, especially that it is easy time in an unsecured setting.
Is that it is a Correctional Service of Canada prison. It still has all of the harmful and invasive practices like strip searching, the practice of segregation. There's still medium security classifications, minimum security classifications, supervisions, and protocols that you would find at every other women's prison in Canada.
She's responding to last week when it was learned that Terry Lynn McClintock has been serving her time for several months at Okimau-Ochi. She's serving a life sentence in the murder of 8-year-old Tori Stafford. The Conservatives went after the government, often commenting about the lodge.
Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
The Prime Minister knows he's playing games with words. Tori Stafford's killer was behind bars and behind razor wire. Now she's living in a condo.
Lynn McClintock went from behind bars to a lodge where single and family residential units with bathrooms, a bedroom, a kitchenette, and an eating area, and a living room exist. That's where she's at right now, not behind bars.
Comments on Michelle Rempel's Facebook page were mostly criticisms of Trudeau or about reinstating the death penalty, but a few questioned the living conditions. One said, the Healing Lodge description sounds more like a Best Western. A few others, their existence. Healing lodges are ridiculous anyways. They should all be closed. Churcher finds these types of discussions harmful.
We're entering this age of reconciliation within our Indigenous communities, and what we're seeing in the national media is a critique of the one site across Canada where Indigenous women can receive culturally appropriate programming.
McClintock once self-identified as a non-status Indian, according to a 2012 Canadian press story. But Churcher would not comment on whether or not she belongs at Okimau-Ochi, and says all women would benefit regardless of their crimes.
Absolutely, and again, eventually all people who are incarcerated will be reintegrated. That's the nature of the legislation in our country. So as a Canadian public, we would want to make sure that they have access to whatever programs they need.
On Tuesday morning, Conservative MP Candice Bergen introduced a motion to debate McClintock's transfer. Again, the Conservative opposition questioned why McClintock was doing time in a healing lodge.
So why is she being given a cushy transfer to a healing lodge with no fence?
Karen McCrimmon, Parliamentary Secretary for Public Safety, spent much of her speech defending Okimau-Ochi's safety as a medium security prison.
I urge my colleagues across the aisle to stop denigrating healing lodges. They are an important element of our correctional system, and they have a record of successfully holding inmates accountable for the most serious of crimes.
Conservative MPs plan to support and attend a rally planned on Parliament Hill on November 2nd. Todd Lamarand, APTN National News, Ottawa.
It's time for us to take a quick break, but when we come back, reaction to the new Coalition Avenir Quebec government. A wind of change blew across Quebec during the provincial elections, which were held earlier this week. For the first time in 50 years, neither the Liberals nor the Parti Québécois are in power. Danielle Richette reports.
François Legault from Coalition Avenir Québec, or CAQ, will be the Quebec's 32nd premier. Legault's party won with a stunning 74 seats in the Quebec National Assembly. His decisive victory gave the Liberal Party and the Parti Québécois the worst results of their history. In his victory speech, he stressed his intention to govern for all Quebecers.
Let's work together to make Quebec stronger within Canada, and I want to assure you that my government will be your government.
In Legault's speech, not a word was said about Indigenous people, but a letter sent by the CAQ to the Assembly of First Nations of Quebec and Labrador expressed some commitments.
The letter clearly stated the intentions of the CAQ to implement the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples, but it didn't go into detail as we had requested that the National Assembly would follow suit with the comments in maybe considering a bill that would guide the measures from this government.
Picard also reiterated the Assembly of First Nations of Quebec and Labrador's intention to call upon the new government within 100 days of its formation to a formal meeting with all First Nations chiefs.
We have a Chiefs Assembly scheduled for mid-November. We certainly hope that the Premier will be available to meet with the chiefs, at least the first meeting, and then from there we'll see, where that takes us.
But for Picard, there's an issue that will be very high on the agenda, and it's all about titles, rights, and economy of First Nation for First Nations.
That area is very broad. It touches on lands and resources. It touches on development. It touches on labor as well.
Quebec Indigenous people will also be able to count on Quebec Solidaire, a party who managed to triple their seats at the National Assembly. In her speech, Manon Massé highlights the importance of Indigenous people and their rights in the province of Quebec.
Et ce soir, je vous annonce d'entrée de jeu que je vais continuer à garder le dossier des Autochtones parce que je trouve ça majeur. Je ne sais pas pourquoi, mais moi, négocier de nation en nation, ça ne me fait pas peur.
The CAQ's victory leaves many Indigenous people wondering, will this new government bring positive changes for them? But already, Premier Legault contacted the regional chief Picard today to start the conversation. Danielle Richette, APTN National News, Montreal.
The federal government has announced its next steps in moving forward on the Trans Mountain Pipeline. According to the Minister of Natural Resources, they won't cut corners in getting it right. Here's Annette Francis.
The Minister of Natural Resources got right to the point at the early morning press conference.
We have decided to follow the guidance from the Federal Court of Appeal. We believe that we can and must move forward by engaging in a meaningful and focused consultation with Indigenous groups on the Trans Mountain Pipeline Expansion Project.
Last month, the Federal Court of Appeal found consultation with Indigenous communities was not robust enough for the Trans Mountain Pipeline approval to be valid. To get it right, Minister Sohi announced his government will reinitiate the consultation process. It will more than double the consultation teams with expertise from across Canada. Government representatives will have a clear mandate.
That our government has appointed former Supreme Court of Canada Justice, the Honorable Frank Iacobucci, as federal representative to oversee the consultation process. He will initially provide advice on designing the process and will then oversee it to ensure the Indigenous consultations are meaningful and comply with the direction given by the Federal Court of Appeal.
When asked if First Nations along the pipeline route would have the right to consent or not to the project, the minister says this.
We're going to make our sincere effort to listen, consult, and offer accommodation where those accommodations are possible. But we also understand that there might be groups that will still oppose this project. That's fine, because that's the right to do so. But that does not mean that if we fulfill our constitutional obligation, that those groups may have a veto to stop this project.
NDP MP Romeo Saganash took the opportunity to question that approach in the House of Commons.
How can the Prime Minister claim that he will consult again when he has repeatedly said in this House that this project will be built no matter what? Doesn't the Prime Minister realize that he's in fact totally abdicating on his constitutional duty to consult and accommodate Indigenous peoples and obtain their consent?
According to Minister Sohi, there will be no timeline for the consultation process. Annette Francis, APTN National News, Ottawa.
It was all smiles and handshakes last week after the feds announced a $40 billion liquid natural gas project for British Columbia. But now Premier John Horgan has a political and environmental juggling act on his hands as he attempts to hold his minority government together.
Our role in opposition is to ensure British Columbians know exactly what this government promised and exactly what they're doing and how they are in contrast with each other.
Green leader Andrew Weaver, whose party is key to propping up Horgan's government, did not attend the signing ceremony and accused the NDP of grand hypocrisy. Weaver slammed Premier Horgan for his decision to pursue the LNG industry after years of criticizing former BC Premier Christy Clark for doing the same thing. Well, it's time for another break, but we've got more news to come, so stick around. Hello and welcome back. Many living in the North are working to revive their culture, and some people record that work for future generations. That's exactly what's taking place in a new Northern documentary. Our reporter, Charlotte Moret-Jacobs, attended the screening in Yellowknife.
I'm away from Leslie Johnson could have waited to air her doc. It's not quite done, but showing the piece as is to a packed Yellowknife audience was crucial to the process. Revolution Moosehide has been in the making for years.
I think, as other people started joining in, it was just like, wow, this is like pretty cool. Like this is all kind of happening. And then as it all started unfolding, I think that it became kind of apparent that there was like a much bigger thing that was going on.
It follows Mila Nakiko's journey of strengthening culture by learning how to tan moosehide. So soft.
It's what's it?
Along the way, she is joined by two other women who are new to tanning. It's the first time the tanners have viewed the dog, but they have a lot to say about it.
It's really nice to see it in retrospect, and like trying to teach that to other people today is like, oh, I should have more patience. But yeah, it was a huge change.
The learning journey of moosehide tanning ultimately leads to the creation of a local grassroots organization, Bene na Wo, which is well known in the North for supporting Indigenous traditional learning.
It just really created a really good foundation for for our relationships, for us to be able to work together and to continue to work together, not only tanning hides, but also like putting on camps and helping to teach other people, and also that goes into the other work that we do through Bene na Wo, our emerging leadership workshops.
and I took it off the
Johnson
smoke
says
and,
she
and
wanted
I
to
looked at the
showcase
color,
just how far
and
these women
I
have
smelled
come.
it. It was
I feel really privileged that I was able to capture such an amazing journey for like these three really amazing badass ladies.
Like the shared efforts it takes to tan moose hide, Johnson seeks input from the community on telling this story.
I kind of considered this to be like an almost finished film that is going to get finished in the next little while, and basically I hope that it, has like a little bit of a festival run.
I knew.
Charlotte Mark Jacobs, APTN National News, Yellowknife.
An old park is being transformed into something new in downtown Winnipeg. Four Indigenous artists are hoping their creations will make a statement. Daryl Stranger has more.
Right next to the APTN World Headquarters here in Winnipeg, Manitoba, lies Air Canada Park. The park used to just be an old fountain with no connection to the community. Now, the park is home to a public art project from the Winnipeg Arts Council dubbed This Place. The grand opening showcased sculptures by 4 Indigenous artists, free food, and live performances. The event drew a crowd. The 4 works complement each other. They are anti-monuments, but they honor the ancestors and spur discussion around Indigenous experiences on this land. The stack of school chairs symbolizes the failed attempts to de-educate and assimilate us. They are overturned to signify the time of being told is over. The square dancers expresses the traditional dance of the Métis people, a symbol of their resilience and optimism during Canada's formative years. Roland Soyer created this piece. She says this two-headed coin captures the ambivalence of Treaty 1 and hopes the park sheds light on Indigenous issues.
This kind of anchors everything. So you have 4 artists, 4 major artworks dealing about the social, political, and cultural issues of Indigenous people today.
Electrical Currents raises awareness about the impacts of hydroelectric development in the north and the impact it has on the Métis and First Nation communities. Julie Nagam spoke about her art and the discussion she hopes it brings.
I think that that's the interesting thing about public art is that it actually sparks kind of difficult dialogues in the public space, and you get the opportunity for people to be more aware of issues that they wouldn't otherwise be aware of.
Mayor Brian Bowman is Métis. He's also in the middle of a city election campaign.
We want all Winnipeggers and visitors to be very proud of our Indigenous heritage and our Indigenous future here in Winnipeg. And through art, we can share our story with the world and with each other. So it's incredibly important.
These works of art are permanent, and they will forever remind us of the importance of the land they sit on and the significance of the Indigenous culture, people, and way of life. Daryl Stranger, APTN National News, Winnipeg.
Well, that's all the news I have for you this APTN News weekend, but you can always get more or catch up on what you've missed on our website, aptnnews.ca. I'm Melissa Ridgen. Have a great long weekend.